prepared is a very dangerous thing, but I will, in the interest of time and in the interest of questions that have emerged here today. So I wanted to say, to focus on two things, and then very shortly say something also about healing. I want to say something about the theme of this session, about the pursuit of new knowledge production. I think for us the book have come to present an opportunity to reframe research in terms of new ways of doing research, new methodologies in and with communities, new ways of knowing what the outcomes of the research means in and with communities, new epistemologies, and new ways of being that results from the process of research, new ontologies. And I think that's new ways of being for us as researchers, and what we witness from taking the information about the book back to communities, also new ways of being for those storytellers who have been involved in this process. The book is the culmination of thoughtful and intentional work to gain the trust of research participants, to gather information, and then to represent the information in a way that puts the research participants at the center of the research question. What is the effect of apartheid on South African society? And what I found in this research process was that that's not a question that you only ask at the beginning or when you start the research proposal. That is the question that you ask in the middle of every single process. When you are when you are planning the interviews, when you are doing the interviews, when you are debriefing as researchers, that's the question. What is the effect? How are the research participants at the center of this process? And that is very intentional. That was very intentional since we started the process in 2016. So the book now becomes a tool to use the research information, and that's where I want to then move to my second part, moving forward. And I loved, Adebayo, the distinction you made this morning between the simplicity of moving on and the complexity of moving forward. I thought that was a very useful way of putting it. And I think for us, the book is now really just the beginning of a way of, to use it as a tool to think of how to deepen and widen the scope of that research question we started asking in 2016. How do we now involve a wider audience in that conversation about the injustices of the past? And how do we move forward with these stories in our heads instead of moving forward without recognizing that these stories also shape us as a nation? And that is the question we grapple with at the moment. And I want to assure people who have asked what happens now is that these kind of conversations are not the only conversations we are thinking of. I think the launches in Worcester, Bonteheuwel and Langa was already the beginning of that process to involve the communities. And Kim hasn't touched on that, but she has been keeping record about how audiences respond, the storytellers themselves, their children, young people, older children. So we want to keep a record of that. We also want to start a process, you've spoken about, Tamar, about other languages, using other languages. There are at least 30 other stories, and we are already thinking about portraits, fine art. So I think in this research process, this book is really for us the beginning. And it would be very helpful if you could think with us in how we do this and how we take that forward. I just want to say something about the three languages, because I, like a lot of you have today, also want to invoke Toni Morrison. So I watched an interview with her, a 2014 interview that was obviously rebroadcast now after she died. And in this interview, she said that race is a is an issue of language. And she, the presenter asked her about her short story Recitative, which, if you know the story, is about two women. She never says in the story at all which one, that the one is black and the other is white, but you can gather that information from reading the circumstances and the privilege of the one, and it's clear which one is white and which one is black. I'm sure you know the story, but she doesn't say that. And then in this interview she talked about that story, and she also talked about a Hemingway story where Hemingway, and that's her issue with how white people portray black people in their stories, in their literary discourse, where Hemingway describes two people approaching the character in the story as a black man and a Cuban approached me. And she said, so it could have been two Cubans, you know, but it's a black man and a Cuban. So what I wanted to say, I used that to talk about the fact that we translated all the stories in English Xhosa, that all the stories appear in those three languages. It's not just a matter of being respectful to the languages that the people spoke that we interviewed, but I think there is also something in creating a community that see their stories in other languages. A language community, an Afrikaans language community, that see a story that they know very well, like the story of Bonteheuwel, in Xhosa and in English, while he spoke in Afrikaans, I think shifts something, or I hope it shifts something. And in the same way, for someone, an English white person, reading a story of a Xhosa black person in Afrikaans and in English, says something about that stories exist in different languages and that experiences exist in different languages. So I think that's also, and how to navigate that conversation of language, and is also something we want to learn to do. But I want to also explain that that was very intentional, and it wasn't just because we wanted to honor the languages that the people spoke. Lastly, I also just wanted to say something quickly about healing. At the launches in Bonteheuwel, Langa and Worcester, people spoke a lot about healing and weights. The weights have been lifted once they see these stories. And like Pumla, I also just want to emphasize that although we also repeat that, and that gives us hope, that was meaningful, that's part of the meaning making of the storytellers in the book, I don't think we see it as a final healing, but really just as the beginning, and that this kind of research with research participants, and really in proximity and in trying to stay close to the stories, is also a way of dealing with that. How does that happen? That unfolding of healing, or just a repair, or the irreparable, repairing the irreparable. And I think that is all I want to say.